I will do my best to explain this freeze aspect. Now, freeze aspect, usually it refers to freeze aspect ratio. You can either have it on or you can have it off. With it on, if you change the height of a pattern, Creative Studio will refigure the width of the pattern. Now this pattern is designed at 18 inches high and 17.3 inches wide. I would not be able to quilt that on a large quilt on my classic machine. Let's look at the geometric square. The designer size of it is 10 inches by 10 inches. It is a square. So there's several ways you can change the size of a pattern. Now you can either change it here, where you have your pattern in preview. You can set the height the way you want it. With this geometric square, you could turn off the freeze aspect. You could make the height one number and the width another number. Height, and width. You can change those. They would not necessarily be the same. This bubbles pattern, that is something that you would not want to turn off the aspect, freeze aspect, because you need, if you change one number or the other, you can either change the width or you can change the height, whichever. You want, if I change the height to 15, I want the width to be the correct number to correspond to that. Because if you didn't, especially with a pattern like the bubbles, it would be distorted. You would either have the bubbles elongated horizontally or elongated vertically. So we'll do some examples here. We'll look at some things. I'm just going to go to repeat patterns because most of the time, most of the quilting you do, especially if you're doing blocks and sashings, you're going to do this in repeat patterns. Now, I'm going to put a copy of this on the screen at its regular size, which is height 18, width 17.3. It has one repeat, one row, so I'm just going to click OK and put that on the screen. And I will move it out of the way. So I'll just move it over here somewhere where it's out of the way. And I'm going to close out the repeat pattern setup. And I'll go to repeat patterns again. Okay, I can change the height of this to fit, say, my classic, and usually I run patterns at 15 inches. Freeze aspect is on, and I want it on. I want it on because I want the height and the width to be in proportion. So I'm going to go and click on the height, change it to 15, and then when I click up here on the width, it's going to refigure the height of it, the width of it, to correspond to the height of 15, and it automatically turns off the freeze aspect. Now I will just click OK to put one copy of that on the screen, and we can compare them. We notice in both examples the circles, the bubbles, are in fact nice and round. So I'll kind of match this up, and you can see what effect changing all of that had on it. Even though it's not as high, it's also not as wide, so it stays in the correct proportion. So I'll just move that over. Then I'm going to exit out of, I already did that. So go into repeat patterns again, and this time I'm going to turn off the freeze aspect. Okay, I'm going to turn it off. All I have to do is I can either click one time and get the arrow and go and turn it off, or you can just double click in the box and it'll turn it on or off. If it's off, it'll turn it on. If it's on, it'll turn it off. I'll double click, turn it off. I'm going to change my height to 15. My freeze aspect is off, so it is not going to recalculate the width. The width is going to stay the same. I'm going to click OK and put a copy of that on the screen. And we can compare this to the other patterns. And see, I changed the height to 15, but the width stayed at 17. So it's as wide as this one, but it's not as tall. So you can see the bubbles are ovals, and it has been elongated horizontally. And you can compare it over here, see? So I'll just put that in place. And what's neat about this program is, I'll go back to repeat patterns, and see it went back to the same 18 high and 17.3 wide. The freeze aspect is back on. So if I turn this off and I leave the width of this, I take the width of this and I change it. I want to change it maybe to 15, or I'll make it 12, and you'll really see what happens. So it doesn't change anything, and I put a copy of that on the. You can see how it affects the size of the bubbles. See, it has elongated them vertically because I have it 18 high and 12 wide. See, this one you could even make it more noticeable by making the width of it wider, like that. You could distort it. So that's why a freeze aspect is very important in doing block work and edge-to-edge quilting. So you would want to keep the freeze aspect on. There are some occasions where you would want to turn the freeze aspect off. And one of the cases is with this geometric square. If I take the geometric square, I'm going to get out of the setup. Geometric square, it is designed at 10 inches by 10 inches, and the freeze aspect is on. So if I change this height to 12, Creative Studio is going to make the width 12 because it's going to maintain the aspect ratio of the height to the width. I'll go back to make them both 10. That's the design. Now, here's where we need to be able to change one number and change the other number to correspond maybe to a boundary around a quilt. So here's what we can do with this. I'll leave this all as designed at 10 by 10. I'll go to repeat patterns. I'm going to take this freeze aspect, double click in the box, turn it off. I want to make the width of this 60. But I want the height to be 72. So this gives me a rectangle that is 60 inches wide and 72 inches high. So if I click OK, it's going to put that on the screen. And I need to get all of this stuff out of the way. So this is one time you would want the freeze aspect turned off. And this allows you to make the width whatever number you need it to be and the height whatever number you need it to be. We do this all the time using setting up boundaries. And we could also set up another one inside of here and make a boundary within a boundary representing the border of a quilt. So I'm going to take this and change the reference point. Let's see what happens when I do this. Change it to center. Okay, see, it changed the position of that pattern around the center of the quilt. So let's say I want to put another one of these inside of there to represent the inner seam line of the border on the outside of the quilt, along the outside edge of the quilt. I can go to repeat patterns again, turn off my freeze aspect. I'll make the width, I'm going to make this a 5-inch border around there. Remember, I put in 60, so I'll put in 50. And it was 72, so I'll make it 62. I will change my reference to center, and it's going to place it right around this crosshair point here. When I click OK, there it is, it's inside of there. And that's how we work in SAM in setting this kind of stuff up. So here's the whole deal with freeze aspect. There's cases where you want the freeze aspect to be on, because if you change the height of a pattern, you want the width to be changed proportionally. That is, maintain the ratio between the width and the height. And in some cases, you want the freeze aspect off so that you can size a pattern like the geometric square, where it is higher than it is wide. Another thing we would do in this case would be just to grab these two, and we could combine them. Then we could right click and convert pattern to a boundary. Now we have a boundary within a boundary here, and we could put our corner patterns, our border patterns, and all this stuff as a layout in, say, SAM. Now this is something to think about for the freeze aspect. When do I want it on? When do I want it off? It depends on what you're doing. What kind of pattern are you working with? Hopefully this will help some of those that have some questions about freeze aspect.